Minister, I want to come to your meeting with China's Foreign Minister Wang Yi in South Africa. You said in your opening statement that you told him that the Australian Defence Force...
The opening statement of the meeting?
Your opening statement from this Senate estimates?
No, sorry, I had opening remarks as well at the meeting. Sorry,
okay.
I don't know which one you're referring to.
So you said in your opening statement to Senate estimates this morning that you told the Foreign Minister that the Australian Defence Force would provide at least 12 hours notice in such circumstance. Is that what you told him?
Sorry, could you repeat that?
Of course. In your opening statement this morning, you said that you told China's Foreign Minister that you would provide at least 12 hours notice, that Australia would provide at least 12 hours notice. Is that what you told him?
I'm just looking at the opening remarks to the media, with the media there, and I think there I simply spoke about expectations around safe and professional military conduct. I'll just have to get some advice about the range of hours that I referenced, which was consistent with the advice from Defence.
Mm. But you said 12 hours notice this morning. As officials have pointed out, as Ms Lawson said, that's not the correct best practice. As the ADF pointed out yesterday, it's 24 to 48 hours. So I just want to establish what it was that you told Wang Yi.
Yeah, and I've just said I'll need to get some advice if we can come back to it.
Okay, thank you.
I'm just trying to recall the range that was that we discussed in the meeting.
Was anybody in that meeting here today? Ms Lawson, you were there. So from your memory, do you remember what the Foreign Minister told Wang Yi?
Senator, my recollection was 12 to 24, and we have clarified with Defence that is an appropriate time frame in line with international best practice.
But you yourself just said before, earlier, in helping to correct Senator Wong, that it was 24 to 48, not 12 to 24.
Senator, I think there have been references to 24 to 48 hours in other places, but I think 12 to 24, my understanding is that is an appropriate time frame to expect.
Admiral Johnson was very clear about this. He's the Chief of Defence Force. He's a naval officer. He repeatedly said yesterday 24 to 48 hours. I can't remember on any occasion him saying 12 hours. Are you sure it's 12 hours?
I would need to clarify that with Defence.
It would be a problem if we've given the Chinese Foreign Minister the wrong best practice time frame, wouldn't it?
Well, I think I would get the ROC checked. My recollection is, as Ms Lawson has said, which is 12 to 24. Obviously, more is better. Yes, and the CDF was very clear that ADF best practice is 24 to 48. He did not say 12 to 24. Well, I'm not... The Australian Defence Force operates at world's best practice in these circumstances. But whatever, we do not regard the notice that China gave as adequate. We've made that clear. Who provided advice to you in preparation for that meeting and told you that it was 12 to 24 and not 24 to 48?
Senator, the advice that came to us from the Department of Defence was focused on the fact that China did not issue a formal notice to mariners. The time frame of that we will double check, but this is the key point, is that the formal notice to mariners was not made. That should be made directly to the Australian Defence Force. That is the critical point.
We're in agreement on that. That is critical, but it's also important that, as I've heard the Foreign Minister say many times, on the international stage we speak with one voice. and we are not speaking with one voice if we're giving different timeframes to describe best practice and what our ADF does. The CDF was very clear, it's 24 to 48. Where did 12 to 24 come from?
Senator, we will double check the advice that was provided close to immediately after the incident occurred. This was a very high-level representation conveying the clear message to the Chinese government that a formal notice to miners did not occur. We will double check the advice about the timeframes, but the critical message, as I say, is that our assertion and our clear position is that China did not follow international best practice, and that message was conveyed very clearly at that meeting.
I understand, but it's actually not very clear if we're giving different numbers. Sorry, Foreign Minister.
So, I'll make 2 points. The basis of our expectations of notice are clear. I think yesterday there was evidence that the RAN conducted a live firing exercise earlier this year and lodged a notice to airmen mariners around 24 hours in advance with Air Services Australia. The notice included dimensions of where the live firing would occur, confirmation that firings would not take place within 10 nautical miles of known air routes or air activity. The notice also includes instructions for civil aircraft in the area to maintain a listening watch and to respond to requests for identification. Now, Australia, where we have large scale exercise, and I think this was covered yesterday, there is a more extensive and consultation and notification practice, for example, for something like Talisman Sabre. I think the Defence Force covered this yesterday. Deputy Prime Minister on radio this morning made the point that whilst what China engaged in did comply with international law, that this was not the standard by which Australia operates. He said at the end, we would, in the live firing event, be giving 12 to 24, sometimes 48 hours notice. But what I would say is I presented to Wang Yi what I was advised in terms of notice to make those representations, but the detail of what that notice should include is something that would need to be resolved between Defence.
Sure. I have no doubt, Foreign Minister, that whatever you're advised you would have faithfully conveyed. I'm not suggesting otherwise, but I do want to understand what was advised, and I understand officials have taken that on notice. But you just said that the Defence Minister said on radio this morning 12 to 24 hours. Again,
sometimes 48. I think
yep.
I think this is what has been sent to me is what he said publicly.
Yep. Again, I don't doubt that.
My point is.
Sorry, Foreign Minister, I haven't finished asking my question.
No. But I just wanted to be clear. My point, the point I was making, is there is a distinction between what we might do, as the RAN did for a live firing exercise, and what we might do for a much larger exercise.
Okay. Well, my memory of the evidence yesterday is that the ADF was very clear that best practice is 24 to 48. You just said that the DPM said on radio this morning 12 to 24 and sometimes 48. Is he also at odds with Defence's best practice advice?
No.
Well, it seems that way based on the evidence they gave yesterday. No one ever said 12 hours yesterday. They said 24 to 48.
Well, Senator, you need to put to CDF the different circumstances.
No, I don't have the opportunity to do that because they appeared yesterday, but when I asked him, he was clear and he said it repeatedly. If it does emerge that you've conveyed the wrong advice to Foreign Minister Wang, will you correct the record, and how will you do so?
What do you mean correct the record?
Well, if you've given a foreign government the wrong advice about Australian best practice, it would need to be clarified, surely.
Senator, my recollection is that the advice to us was 12 to 24 hours. My understanding is that, as the Foreign Minister has said, it depends on the nature of the exercise. We will need to clarify with Defence why it is that there were different timeframes provided to us and provided in the hearing. But that is a matter for Defence to answer why sometimes it's 12 to 24 and sometimes it's 24 to 48. It's something that we will have to ask Defence to clarify with us.
Yes, and I appreciate if you can clarify that for us on notice as promptly as you can, noting that obviously if the Prime Minister calls an election soon, which he may do, the Parliament will be prorogued and questions on notice are effectively cleared. So I'd be grateful if you could do it before then, because I think it's important for the public record that it's accurate. Just to the substance of the meeting with Foreign Minister Wang, is the only concern you raised with him about this conduct the lack of notice, or did you raise other concerns?
Senator, we don't go into the details, obviously, of diplomatic discussions. You would be aware that the Minister did brief media further to that meeting and covered the range of issues that you would expect, including consular matters, human rights, our expectations around safe and professional military conduct, as well as the Middle East, Russia's illegal invasion of Ukraine, the Pacific, and the sovereignty rules and laws that matter to Australians.
Thank you, Ms Lawson, but the Foreign Minister has already gone into some detail about the concerns that she raised with Foreign Minister Wang, and it only relates, as per this opening statement this morning, to lack of notice. And so what I'm seeking to understand is, are they the only grounds that the Foreign Minister raised concerns, or were there other issues of concern about this activity that were raised?
Senator, the key concern that we have around this activity is the lack of notice provided.
So no concerns were raised about the 49 civilian aircraft that had to divert their route at short notice because of these activities?
Senator, as you would expect, and as per Defence's evidence yesterday, we did consider this incident to be disruptive. Hence, you know, the desire for formal notification. And as you would expect, we did raise that that fact with the Chinese government.
Right, so the specific issue of 49 flights being diverted was raised with Foreign Minister Wang.
Senator, I'm not going to go into details about diplomatic discussions. It would be counterproductive.
I thought...
I'm happy to say publicly.
Please.
I'm happy to say publicly, though, that obviously the reason notice should be given in more substance and with more time frame than was, in part is for reasons of transparency, and also not to cause undue alarm or commercial disruption. And you know, that is our position, and you would anticipate, I think I might have said that publicly, that we would reflect that position in our engagements.
So is that confirmation that you did raise the specific issue of flight diversions, 49 flight diversions with Wang Yi?
No, what I'm saying is that is our position, and you should anticipate that our diplomatic engagements reflect the Australian government position.
Why can't you say...
That's because we don't do that, Senator. We don't do verbatim everything that is in a meeting. I, in fact, have been much more transparent than many foreign ministers about what is discussed in meetings, because I think it is reasonable for topics. But what I'd say to you is the reason that advance notice and substantive notice should be given is in part transparency, but also commercial disruption.
I thought that you might say that about not disclosing the details of diplomatic engagements, and I direct you to a transcript of the Prime Minister on the 3rd of April 2024, where he recounts in quite some detail a conversation he had with Israel's Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu relating to the IDF's accidental killing of the Australian aid worker Zomi Frankham. In that press conference, he not only outlines at length and in detail the issues that he raises, he also discloses Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu's responses repeatedly. Why is it okay for the Prime Minister to disclose both sides of a phone conversation with a foreign head of government, but it's not okay for you to tell me what you said in a meeting with Wang Yi?
Is this in relation to the death of an Australian?
Yes.
Well, so can we agree not to to treat with respect a conversation about the death of an Australian. Could we at least agree that, Senator?
Of course we should
Thank
be
you.
respectful to Ms Franklin and her family
Thank you.
for what was an utterly tragic death. But what I'm asking you about is the Prime Minister's public comments about his engagement with a foreign leader.
Well,
in that instance, he disclosed details about it. In this instance, you're refusing to.
No, hang on.
If this is a hard and fast diplomatic rule, then why are you not willing? Why is he able to breach it but you are not?
Well, Senator, a few comments. That's one of those cross-examination statements where you take one incorrect proposition, another incorrect proposition, and then put it as an inconsistency. So let's be very clear, I don't agree with the way you've construed the question for your cross-examination political purposes. And I've done it before, so in that chair or this chair here, so I'm aware of what you're doing. But what I would say to you is this was my 9th meeting with Foreign Minister Wang Yi, and I was able to engage with him rather than just write a letter because there is engagement. You were never able to put your views directly to him or to his counterpart. Right? So let's be clear. Secondly, I do think it's important that various topics which are raised are disclosed. I do that at a high level so that Australians can get a sense of the way in which we are seeking to manage, including the differences in the relationship, that we do raise issues such as those Ms Lawson referred to, including human rights. The Australian government position in relation to notices, as I've outlined, transparency and disruption to commercial aircraft being amongst those, amongst the benefits of providing advance notice, including to mariners and airmen, as Ms Lawson has described. Senator, I would remind you that when you were in government, the PLA Navy did visit Australia, did come to Australia in June of 2019, in fact on the anniversary of Tiananmen, without notice. So I will just remind you that you are very keen to seek notice now, but no advance notice was given to the Australian public.
Foreign Minister, you are right. There was a period in the last term of government where the Chinese government refused to engage with the Australian government, but frankly I think that reflects on them and was their decision to do so, not the Australian government's decision to do so. But you are wrong when you say that there was not engagement between the Australian government and the Chinese government under the previous government. In fact, including in the last term, there was engagement for much of that term.
Well, certainly, Senator, your government warmly welcomed Chinese warships into Sydney Harbour but didn't tell Australians until they were sailing into the harbour. So all of your questions about notice and transparency should be taken in that light.
They didn't do a live firing exercise in Sydney Harbour.
No, they visited on the anniversary of Tiananmen, which obviously, has some controversy for many, many people in Australia. So I'm just making the point that your view about the importance of notice appears to only apply on certain occasions. But it is the case, more substantive in the way that Ms Lawson described, and advance notice should have been provided.
So you spoke about your engagement with your counterpart over this issue. Why is it that the Deputy Prime Minister and Defence Minister has not engaged with his counterpart on the evidence of Defence officials yesterday since May or June last year following this incident or any other serious safety incidents?
Senator, in the case of these types of incidents, we do have an established procedure, which I think Defence set out yesterday. And that procedure was followed in this instance as well. We engaged with the Chinese government through military and diplomatic channels as per the established practice. I would like to reassure you, Senator, that in those engagements we did talk about disruption and clearly outlined our expectation for an advance notice in order to avoid that kind of disruption to commercial craft.
Thank you, Ms Lawson, but the Foreign Minister was just extolling the benefits of having access to our Chinese counterparts. Why hasn't the Defence Minister availed himself of the opportunity provided by that access for almost a year after either this incident or indeed the very serious safety incident a couple of weeks ago involving the P8 Poseidon in the South China Sea?
Well, Senator, first, I think you should take some responsibility for the approach that you took in government. I know it's convenient to say it's all someone else's fault, but you engaged in domestic political attack, including describing the now Deputy Prime Minister as a Manchurian candidate.
I never said that.
Well, then disavow it.
I did at the time.
Oh.
I did on Insiders 3 days later.
Your leader hasn't, has he?
Well, your leader used that phrase as well and never withdrew it.
All right, colleagues, come on, let's
No,
get
but
back to the
my
questions.
point is, I don't think anyone watching how Mr Morrison and Mr Dutton conducted the discussion of the China relationship with China between 2019 and 2022 would think they did so without that relationship being handled with an overriding objective of domestic politics. Overriding, whether it was in Australia's national interests or not. And that was my objection to it at the time. It is not that China does not do things that we disagree with. It does. As I've said, China's strategic intent hasn't changed. We sought to stabilise the relationship, not because we thought that would remove difference, but because we understood that we have to have a more mature and considered way of dealing with difference. And that is what we've done. Now, you talk about extolling the virtues in a very dismissive way. I happen to think it is a useful thing for a country to be able to engage with one of the great powers in its region. Like, that's important for the Australian people. It's important not just on the economic front, but because China is a power in our region and it is a global power. We will agree on cooperate on some things. We will not agree on many things, but we have to keep engaging in Australia's interest. In relation to defence strategic dialogue that Ms Lawson spoke about, which DFAT's also engaged. I don't know if you had the opportunity to ask anything about that yesterday. It's the first such dialogue, I think, since 2019. Why do we want dialogue between defence forces, Senator? Because we want to try and avoid miscalculation. We want to try and avoid escalation. We know that defence-to-defence dialogue, military-to-military engagement is important for preserving stability and peace. That is why we do it.
Thank you. No one's suggesting that we shouldn't. We're just trying to explore how it's being utilised in Australia's national interest. I suspect the Chair's going to move the call along shortly, so just a couple of final questions on this. When you met with Wang Yi, did you seek any commitments about future conduct from the PLA in our region?
I reiterated my expectation to him. I would anticipate there will be more discussions about this, Senator.
Are there any scheduled?
Well, we have regular dialogue with the Chinese system at different levels.
Is China's activity in the Tasman Sea over the last week consistent with the stabilisation agenda?
As I said in my opening, stabilisation doesn't mean that China will not do things with which we do not agree. I mean, this is the inconsistency that's at the heart of the proposition that you've been putting. China is a great power. Its strategic intent has not changed. The only question for those either in government who seek government is how you deal with that. I don't think war talk from senior members of the opposition is a mature way of dealing with it.
That doesn't answer my question. Is their conduct consistent with what I understood to be a shared vision of a stabilised bilateral relationship?
Well, I have answered your question, Senator. You see, you imply, and some of the commentators I've seen seem to suggest that stabilisation was a view that somehow China wouldn't do things with which we didn't agree and we wouldn't do things with which China didn't agree. That's not correct. It is a way of understanding how you maturely deal with a relationship where you have interests that at times differ, and how do you manage those differences? How do you navigate them wisely? I mean, you could. The alternative is we just yell. That doesn't keep Australians safer. So stabilisation was based on the very pragmatic assessment that there will be things on which we disagree. China will disagree with us and we will disagree with China. But we are better off if we engage about them.
No one is arguing against engagement, Senator Wong. I'm just seeking to understand, and I'd take it from your answer, that you accept that even while pursuing a stabilisation agenda, that we will have incidents like this. It is consistent with a stabilised relationship to have incidents like this.
I refer to my previous answer.
All right.
I mean, a stabilised relationship with China necessarily recognises that there are things China will do and that we will do that the other party does not agree with.
All right, I need to move the call